So what is OPT? OPT is optional practical training. It is experiential learning that allows you to gain work benefits in your field of study after you graduate, at least for the most part. You can apply for 12 months of OPT for each level of study. That includes the bachelor's, master's, and PhD here at USF. What is an EAD card? An EAD card stands for an employment authorization document. It's basically like a driver's license. So this is what gives you proof that you can work off campus. You need to have this in hand before you can work, and the valid from date on the card has to occur before you can start working. So who is eligible to apply for OPT? This can vary for each type of OPT, but for the most part, you have to have been enrolled full-time in a degree-seeking program here at USF for an academic year. So that is a fall and spring term. Unfortunately, summers don't count toward that. Time at N2 doesn't count toward that. And any time you spent studying outside the US prior to entering as an F1 student would not count for that. So you also have to possess a valid foreign passport for this. The exception to this would be Venezuela. Venezuela allows the passport to be valid for 5 years into the future. That's a special agreement just between Venezuela and the US, though. So there are several types of OPT. There's pre-completion OPT, which comes under C3A, post-completion OPT, which is C3B, and STEM OPT, which is C3C. So these are very important to note for when you're applying. You got to make sure you choose the right drop-downs. So pre-completion OPT, this is something most of you will not be doing. CPT is a much better option instead for your internships. There's also a lot of limitations to pre-completion OPT. For instance, in fall and spring, you can only be part-time unless you're a grad student that's done with coursework and only in dissertation or thesis. So that means if you're an undergrad or a grad student that's not in that, you can only have 20 hours per week in the fall and spring term, where on CPT you could have more. There's also a $410 fee for this, and it can take several months to get the approval, where CPT can take weeks to get the approval. Now in summer, you could be full-time. That's over 20 hours per week because that's considered an annual vacation. Another issue with pre-completion OPT is that any time you spend on this is deducted from your post-completion OPT when you apply for it. So if you do this at full-time in the summer for 3 months, it's going to come off time for time. They're going to take 3 months off. You're only going to get 9 instead of 12 months. Now, if you're doing it in fall or spring and part-time, they're going to take it off at half the rate. So instead of 3 months, they would take off a month and a half from your OPT. So post-completion OPT, hopefully that's what most of you are here for today. This is employment that takes place after the completion of your program of study. So you apply for it usually ahead of time, and then you start working after you graduate. This is limited to 12 months, as we mentioned earlier. I know some of you are aware of STEM programs, and if you're in one, you get 3 years of OPT, but everyone only gets 12 months for the first year of their post-completion OPT. Then 90 days before that ends, you would have to apply for the STEM extension. It's just referred to as STEM OPT, and that would give you 2 more years of your OPT if you qualify and are approved for it. Now, post-completion OPT does require you to work full-time. That's 20 plus hours per week, and you must complete your post-completion OPT within 14 months of. So something else you need to know about post-completion OPT is we're going to shorten your I-20 to the end of the term that you're completing your program in. So that means like December 31st, May 31st, August 31st. You cannot keep working on campus after that time, so keep that in mind, especially if you have an assistantship. You need to provide that updated I-20 to your HR, your human resources, your supervisor, and they need to cut you off from working after that time has ended. You cannot occur more than 90 days of unemployment while on OPT, so keep that in mind. We'll go over that more when selecting dates. And again, all campus jobs must cease. So who is eligible for post-completion OPT? We mentioned before each one can have different variations. So for post-completion OPT, you have to have the academic year, the valid passport, plus you have to have met all your requirements to graduate, or you have to be done with all coursework and only have thesis or dissertation left. So there are some benefits between pre-completion OPT and post-completion OPT. If you're a grad student that only has thesis or dissertation left, we're not going to go over these in this presentation. They are mentioned here in the slide, so you can look at them. But if you have questions, please make an appointment or do the virtual drop-in hours or come in through the walk-ins themselves. STEM OPT. STEM OPT stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. As we mentioned before, this is like a 2-year extension of your post-completion OPT. So it gives you the extra 2 years. It requires a secondary application process. So 90 days prior to your OPT ending, you'd apply for the STEM extension. You must be on post-completion OPT to apply. So that means you can't do like one master's in one program, do your post-completion OPT, come back, do a second master's, and think you're going to get your STEM at that time. It doesn't work that way. You have to be in post-completion OPT to apply. You must be working for an E-verified employer whenever you're on STEM OPT. And post-completion OPT, it doesn't matter, but for STEM OPT, it has to be an E-verified employer. Also, it's fine in post-completion OPT to volunteer, be self-employed, but that is not something you can do in STEM OPT, so keep that in mind. You can only apply for STEM OPT twice per your lifetime. So there are something called zip codes that determine if you're eligible for a STEM OPT. It's not just based on the name of your major. So you need to look on your I-20 on page 1 in the middle of the page, and you'll see a series of numbers. It's a 6-digit code. It starts with 2 digits, a dot, and then 4 more digits. Now, if the first 2 digits starts with a 14, which is engineering, 26, which is biological science, 27, which is mathematics, or 40, which is physical science, then you're automatically in a STEM program. If you're not lucky enough to have a zip code that starts with those 2 numbers, then you need to look for the whole number on the list. And you can find this list by Googling STEM zip codes. Comes right up. So scroll down the list, find your number, not the name of your program, but the actual zip code number. So for instance, the master's level of Business Analytics Information System, BIAS, is 11.0501. So if you scroll down the list, you'll find it on there. Now, if you're in the undergrad version, the MIS program, then that's under a zip code that starts with the 52. If you scroll down the list to the bottom, you'll find the 52 majors. There's about 4 of them. None of those are majors here at USF, so therefore the undergrad version is not a STEM major. So when can you start applying for these different OPTs? For pre-completion OPT, you have to meet the academic year first, and then after that, you can apply 90 days before the required start date. For post-completion OPT, there's a 5-month window, 90 days prior to the end of your term, or up to 60 days after during the grace period. STEM extension, there's only a 3-month window, and that's up to 90 days prior to the end of your post-completion OPT. And once your OPT ends, you can no longer apply. So make sure you get that in a very timely manner, because sometimes it can take a long time to get the forms from your employer. So start as soon as possible. How do you apply for OPT? You're going to go into iStart, you're going to go to F1 Practical Training Apply, and you're going to fill out the request I-20 for OPT application e-forms. After you've obtained a new I-20 from our office with the OPT request on it, you're going to apply with USCIS, and for that you're either going to do it online, which is what most people are doing it, or by mail. So if you're doing it online, you'll just go to the website mentioned here. You could also Google Form I-765, open it, scroll down, and you'll see the online link. So it's pretty easy to find. We also include a link to it whenever we issue the I-20 to you in the email. So it's very easy to find the online link. And then by mail, you'll mail the documents to immigration. We'll provide the address with the I-20, and then you'll just mail the docs in with the cover letter we provide for you. Now, do not try to use both of these methods to make the process faster or try to ensure your luck more. It doesn't work that way. It'll actually cause more issues for you. Also, do not file or pay the fee on the online application until you actually have the OPT requested I-20 in hand. That's very, very important. If you submit the application online, pay the fee, they will keep your fee and deny your request. So there are a lot of benefits to applying online. The biggest one, it's a lot quicker process. It's quicker to get the I-20. It's quicker to submit your documents, and it's just a quicker overall process in general. It also has comprehensive and customized questions to the form I-765. So whenever you're filling that out online, they know that you're F1. They take out all the extra questions. If you look at the paper version, it's 7 pages long. It's a form that's used for pretty much every visa type there is, so it's not just for F1s. So there's a lot of questions on there that don't pertain to you, and it can get real confusing on what to fill out and what not to fill out. So the online makes that much easier. You also have immediate access to notifications, such as your receipt. That's very important whenever you're applying for STEM OPT, because usually you need to show that receipt to the employer so they can allow you to keep working after your OPT expires if your STEM OPT is not approved yet. It also has a centralized electronic notification system, so you'll be able to get updates quickly in real time, where otherwise you'd have to wait for them to come in the mail, and by then it's been several weeks. So there's no mail wait time, so for you mailing your documents to them, you don't have to wait for it to get there. You don't have to worry about it getting lost in the mail. You don't have to worry about the shipping costs. So if you're mailing it through regular mail, it could be $8 to $9 to do certified mail. If you're FedExing, it can be over $40 to get it overnight. Or if you do it online, you get it there in a matter of minutes for free. So once you're ready to apply, you're going to go into iStart, you're going to go to F1 Practical Training Apply, and you're going to fill out the request I-20 for OPT application. Once you get in there, you're going to see 5 e-forms that you need to fill out in order to get the I-20. The first 3 you could do pretty quickly. You could do this after this presentation if you're graduating this semester. So for the first one, it's an OPT quiz. You got to pass it with 100. This presentation will help you do that. If not, we actually have the slides of this presentation on the e-form and on our website, so you can review them as you do the quiz. So student contact and program information, you need to always make sure your address, your phone number, and your email is up to date in OASIS. If you change your address, phone number, or email, you should be updating it within 10 days. That's an immigration requirement. So if you haven't done that, make sure you do it. So make sure they're up to date. And for email, I don't mean your @usf.edu email. I'm referring to like your 123, your Qmail, your Gmail, your Hotmail, something like that. And then your program information, make sure it's up to date. So if you're a PhD student that are going to graduate and do your OPT based on a terminal master's, then make sure your records change to reflect that. If you've changed your majors or something, make sure everything's reflected to show that ahead of time. So you're going to list what your major is, what your degree is, and then for academic confirmation, if you're a grad student, you're going to list a grad coordinator, undergrad advisor. They're going to get an email. Talk to them, let them know that to expect the email, let them know what they need to fill out on it, and then they'll submit that to us. You'll get an email when they submit it to us, and then from there it's 3 to 5 business days for us to process your academic confirmation. Then you'll get an email to go on to packet prep. So in packet prep, if you're doing it online, it's a very simple process. You read over it, you submit it, and then you go straight to OPT requested dates. So for requested dates, you're going to pick a start date. Hopefully it'll be a year in the future, and then after that, we'll issue the I-20. So what happens after you submit all your e-forms and everything to us? So again, we're going to review those. We're going to send you emails as you're ready to move on to the next one. You'll get instructions if there are any issues on how to fix those. Once we do the OPT requested date e-form, we're going to email you. We're going to either send you the info about how to apply online if that's what you selected, or more information on how to mail your documents in if that's what you selected. Once you get the new I-20, then you're going to go to My USCIS and fill out your application online or mail your documents in. Now, it's a very timely manner that you have to get the new I-20 to USCIS. So for the most part, you're going to have 30 days to get it to them. But if you're applying late, it's close to the end of your grace period. You also need to get it to them before the end of your grace period. So you have to get it there within 30 days or by the end of your grace period, whichever is earlier. So how do you request the OPT for your application? You're going to do the academic confirmation. You're going to do the academic advisor if you're undergrad, and these are people you should know. Like if you're in MUMA College of Business, it's the MUMA advisors, like Jack Lynch and Sean and Lativa, all of them. So these are people you should already been working with. Same thing for grad students. For BIAS, it used to be Barbara Warner. Now it's Han. For electrical engineering, it's Diana Hamilton. So again, these are people you should know and be working with already. Now, if you have any of these issues still left on your record, please do not try to apply for OPT until they are resolved, and that is academic probation. So if you're on probation, wait until you're sure you can graduate before you proceed. Comprehensive exams, they should all be taken care of well in advance of your final term, but at least before you apply for your OPT. And these are for programs that have a comprehensive exam for the entire program. This is not referring to your finals for your particular class. Insufficient GPA, so if you're a grad student right at a 3.0 or an undergrad at a 2.0, do not go applying for OPT unless you're sure you're going to pass your classes and keep that GPA up. If you have any CLEPs, that's basically a test to test out of a class. You need to have those done, and the grades already into the college and reflected on your record before you apply. Same thing if you're a transfer student. If you're into a previous school or dual enrolled, you need to make sure those transcripts are submitted to the university, evaluated, and reflected on your record before you apply. So what documents do you need? If you're applying online or by mail, you need all of the online documents. So the new 2x2 passport photo, you don't need to get an old one from your country or one that looks like your passport or visa already. Go to CVS, Walgreens, Walmart, get a new one. Passport biographical page, that's the page in your passport with your photo on it. The I-94, you need to have the OPT requested I-20. And then if you had CPT for your current academic level, you would need those CPT I-20s. And if you had any previous EAD cards, say for a J program, a previous F1 program, whatever it might be for, then you would need to upload the front and back of that as well. Now we do have the asterisk next to the I-20s, and that's because whenever you're submitting I-20s to an application like this, you need to make sure the first page is signed and dated, and you need to make sure you're including all 3 pages. Now, if you're mailing your documents in, on top of these documents, you also need a cashier's check or money order. You need the paper form I-765, and you need your visa and the I-797 approval notice saying you're approved for F1 status in the U.S. Now, the exception to this would be countries like Canada that doesn't require a visa. So the photos, again, I mentioned they need to be new and they need to be 2x2. You can go to CVS, Walgreens, or Walmart to get this. And if you're a AAA member, you can even go to AAA and get it for free. If you're mailing your documents in, on the back of the photos, you need to write your name and I-94 number. You could also add the A number, which is the same as the USCIS number if you had a previous EAD card. Now, if you're mailing it in, you also need to place your pictures in a clear baggie. So we do have some at our front desk at our office available, or you could go to like Walmart under the craft section and find them there. So the passport has a lot of good information on it. So on the passport, you actually have the passport number itself. So that's very important. You got to put it on the I-765. You got the expiration date, which you got to put on the I-765. You also have your date of birth. Now your name might already clearly show a last name and a first name, a surname, given name. But in some cases, passports have one big long name and you don't know which is which. So for that, you need to go down to the bottom of the passport. That's what they call the machine readable portion. You'll see on this lady's one, it has RAI for the last name, and then we got double carets in the first name. Now, if she would have a second last name, it would be RAI, single caret, the second last name, double caret, and then the first name. So single carets mean a separate name in that same category. A double carets means it's a whole different category. So it would go last name, double caret, first name, double caret, middle name. So that's how you read that. Now, if you're lucky enough, your passport might have your place of birth. If not, hopefully you know where you're born at. The I-94 record actually has the I-94 number there at the top. Then it has your recent entry into the US. This is the one you should be using on the I-765. It'll have your F1DS status, and then hopefully your name and everything is correct. Now, if you happen to apply it a long time ago, you might have a paper version of this. If you do, make sure you use both sides of it, the front and back. Same would go if you did a change of status inside the US. The I-94 is on the bottom of your approval notice, and you need to make sure you're including the front and back. Now, the requested I-20, it actually shows right on the I-20 that it is requested. So look on page 2, you'll see post-completion OPT and requested. Remember too that you have to sign the front and back of this. You have to get this to immigration within 30 days or by the end of the grace period, and you have to include all 3 pages. Failure to do any of those will be an automatic denial or rejection of your application. The visa, again, you really only need this if you're doing it by mail. Your visa can expire in the US. That's why you're here in the US. That's perfectly fine. It doesn't affect your OPT application. So yeah, you can still apply even if your visa is expired. Cashier's check or money order. This is another one just if you're mailing it in. So you need to make sure it's payable to U.S. Department of Homeland Security. You would print your name on the middle line and then sign the bottom right-hand side. Now this is only for the AMSCOT check, of course, and this is the one I would recommend the most. AMSCOT is the most helpful and lenient company there is when it comes to cashier's checks. So go get it from them. You just give them the $410 and they give you the check. Now some students ask, do they sign the back? No, you don't sign the back. That's only the person cashing it. Publix is probably the least forgiving of all the companies, so I would not advise using Publix. If you do, you need to make sure it's filled out absolutely perfect on the first try. So again, it needs to be for 410. It needs to be U.S. Department of Homeland Security. For the payment information, where it says I-765 currently, you can actually put your CVIS number, OPT, I-765. For the address, you need to make sure your address is fit on that line, so you need to write small, and then you need to sign it. So Walmart usually does the MoneyGrams, again, U.S. Department of Homeland Security on the top line. Middle line, you sign or print your name, and the bottom line is your address. So some additional resources if you're doing this on or by mail. On our e-form, we provide a common mistakes PDF, and we also include a sample I-765. Make sure you are using them if you're doing the paper application for this. If you're doing this online, this is all built in, so you don't need these. These are part of the online process, so there's a lot of information in there that helps you with this. Now, if you're doing it online, there is an additional resource we'll tell you about that could help you, especially setting up your My USCIS account. And that is a company called Redbus has created an online I-765 tutorial website. So just Google Redbus online I-765 and it comes right up. One of our advisors on the chat will post that in the chat. So address considerations, whenever you're filling out paper or by mail, you have to provide a mailing and physical address. Now, if your physical address is the same as the mailing address, that is fine. There's just a box that says, is it the same? You click a yes and you don't have to fill it out again. Now remember, your mailing address should be an address that's valid at least 5 months in the future, and it may be different than your physical address. So you could use like a friend's address, a family member's address. This makes sure if you are that you put them in the care of line. Make sure they're on the lease agreement if it's an apartment. And in fact, if it is the address where you're living at and you're not on the lease, make sure you put someone's name in the care of line that is on the lease. The reason for this is that if it goes to an apartment complex and your name is not on the lease, that apartment complex will return your documents to immigration. We've seen this time and time again. Even if you obtain the receipt to that address, there's a good chance the EAD card would get sent back. So make sure whoever it's going to, it has a care of line and that person name that's on the lease is on there. Now, if you're mailing your documents in, you have to be wary of how you enter the address on the paper form. You want to use the appropriate postal abbreviations, and that's something you can Google, postal abbreviations, and it'll show you what they are. For instance, for Avenue, you would put AVE. For East, you would just put E. So make sure you're keeping it as short as possible when you're writing it in on the paper I-765 because it does allow you to enter more characters than they'll actually put on the envelope when they mail it, which could cut off your apartment number and then you wouldn't get the package. So back to the codes. This is very important, especially when you're doing this online. It's very simple to select the right code and then accidentally bump a down arrow key or something like that and change it to the next line. So just because you think you chose it correctly when you first entered it, you should be reviewing your application at the end before you submit the payment and make sure it has the correct code. And again, most of you are here for post-completion OPT, that's C3B. If later on you're applying for the STEM extension, make sure you're using C3C. So requested dates. Requested dates are again based on the end of the term that you're graduating in. So we mentioned you're going to shorten your I-20 to December 31st, May 31st, or August 31st. Your requested start date can be within 60 days of that date. So for fall, that would be January 1st to February 28th. For spring, that would be June 1st to July 30th. And for summer, it would be September 1st to October 30th. Now you can only apply for your OPT again up to 90 days prior to your graduation. So if you're graduating in fall, that would start early October. If you're graduating in spring, that would be early March. If you're graduating in summer, that would be early May. So choosing dates, you gotta know what you kind of want to pick. If you don't have a job yet, it doesn't make sense to pick the earliest start date because if you get the EAD card and that dates occur, you start accruing days of unemployment. We mentioned before you only get 90 days of unemployment. What that means is if it takes you 60 days to find that first job, 60 minus 90 is 30. If you lose that job later, you only have 30 days of unemployment left to find another job. So it's not good to put an early start date if you don't have a job. If you have an employer that's ready to hire you or have already hired you, ask them what start date they would want you to have. If it's within that 60-day period, use it. If it's after that date, hopefully it's not too far after, and you could just pick the latest date, and then the time in between would be days of unemployment, unless you find something to fill in that time in between. If you want to break from your studies after you graduate, it's been a rough last few years, so just keep that in mind and pick a later date if that's the case. Just let your employer know you can't start because you don't have your work permit yet and you'll start later. So how long do these processes take? If you're applying in iStart, you're looking at about 2 weeks to get the I-20. Once you submit the documents to USCIS, 2 months can be about average right now. 3 months is not unheard of, but definitely this process can change. It's very fluid. A few years ago, it was taking 5 months, but right now they are very good about the process. So packet prep. Packet prep is only for, or these documents are only for mailing your docs in. So the cover letter I mentioned before, we'll email it to you along with the I-20. You're going to check off the documents on the cover letter as you add them. If you don't have something like the EAD card or the I-20 for the CPT, you're going to put N/AA next to it for not applicable. Now the form GG1 or G1145 is something you can actually Google. That's something you'd print out on your own. You'd put in your name, your email, your phone number. You'd attach that to the top of the packet, and then when you mail it in, they'll let you know when they got it by text or an email. Now, these are not needed for the online version because all of this is built into the online version. That's another reason why it's so great. So what happens after you get all this done and ready to go? So once you send it off to USCIS, if you're doing it online, you'll be able to go in later the day, if not by the next day, to your My USCIS, go to the Documents tab, and you'll see your receipt notice. Print that out and upload it in iStart under the F1 Practical Training Apply link. If you're mailing it in, or even if you did it online, you'll probably get a paper copy in the mail in 2 to 4 weeks. So something to know. Once you get that by the mail, if you filed by mail, make sure you upload it into iStart. So you can track the progress of your record once you have the receipt number by going to uscis.gov. This is also kind of built into the My USCIS portal, so you can also go there and see the info. Once you receive the EAD card, make sure you copy the front and back of the card, scan it, and upload it into iStart. So this is something for anyone filing for OPT online or by mail. You should sign up for what's called Informed Delivery by USPS. What this does is basically give you an image of the documents that'll be coming to your mail either the next day or the same day. It seems to differ slightly depending on areas and whatnot. So either you'll get an image the night before of what you're going to get the next day, or you're going to get an image on your text that morning of what you're going to get that day. Now, whatever it is, if you see something that looks like it's from USCIS and it's not actually in your mailbox when it's supposed to be, get down to the post office that's serving that area and check to make sure that you can stop that before it goes back to immigration. That's very important. You do not want these documents to get returned to immigration. So checking your case status, you could do this if you did it mail or online. You can go to uscis.gov, click on check your case status. For the longest time, it's just going to reflect that it's pending. You can put in the receipt number there and it shows you the details. Hopefully later on it'll change to show your card was issued. Maybe it'll even have the tracking number for the package. If so, make sure you track it. And again, if it shows it's supposed to be in your mailbox that day and it's not, get down to the postal office that services that area and try to stop it from getting returned. Now you should be using an address that's valid at least 5 months into the future. But if for some reason there's an issue, like say there's a fire or a flood at the address and you'd had to relocate, then you could go to the My Case Status under Change of Address. You could submit a change of the address. This is not something you should rely on though. We've had many students fill this out, but yet the card still got sent to the old address. So it is best to use an address that's valid into the future instead of relying on this option, but it is there if you need it. So submit a case inquiry. This would be like say you get your receipt notice and instead of an A on your name it has an O. That's a typographical error. You could go to submit a case inquiry. There's one for typographical errors. You could submit that there and hopefully they would change it before you get the EAD card itself. Now the characters are limited for the names on the receipt and on the EAD card. So a lot of times for like last names, it's limited to 18 characters. So if you have a really long last name and it goes over 18 characters, and that includes spaces if you have double names, then they will cut off the last few characters on your name. That is not an issue. That's acceptable. You don't have to submit an inquiry for that. So this is just a closer shot of what it's going to show for the longest time. It's just going to show receipted. Again, hopefully later it'll give you the tracking number and everything. So what do you need to report? So whenever you're graduating, in fact, anytime you need to report your change of address, phone number, email with us within 10 days, you need to do that in OASIS. But a lot of people forget when they move to, say, California for a job to update their address. Make sure you don't. You go into OASIS, you update your local mailing address. And iStart, within 10 days of starting a job, ending a job, or if anything changes with that job, you need to go into iStart F1 Practical Training Report and report that change to us. Again, 10 days. So report personal name changes. For that, you would need a new passport showing the new name. So you go to immigration updates and upload your new passport and update passports. If you report any changes of immigration status, you'd go also into iStart under immigration updates, and that would be update visa stamp or status. If you happen to get a green card, a permanent residence, that would be update citizenship. But for the most part, a lot of you will end up getting H-1Bs later on. If you do, those usually start on October 1st. So that means on October 1st, when that status starts, you should be going into iStart to immigration updates, uploading the approval notice for that change of status in the U.S., include the one that has the I-94 on the bottom showing the new status, and then we'll take care of your record and make sure it's closed out properly. So this is just what it's going to look like when you go into iStart. You're going to see F1 Practical Training Report. You'll see there's one for new employment and end employment. That's pretty obvious. It's when a job starts, when a job ends. Update employment, this is more for minor changes. So say your supervisor changes or the company moves to a bigger address down the street because they're growing. That would be an update. Now, if you're going from, say, an internship with the company to a paid position with the company, that really wouldn't be an update. You would need to report the end of the internship and then report the paid position as a new employment. So some common questions we get about OPT is Social Security number. So if you don't already have a Social Security number, when you file online or by mail, it'll ask you, do you have a social? You'll say no. It'll ask, do you want one? You'll say yes. It'll ask, do you give permission to share your info with social? You'll say yes. And then hopefully your Social Security card will arrive in the mail within 2 weeks before or after your EAD card. Now, if it doesn't arrive and you have your EAD card and the valid from date on the card has occurred, then you can go down to the Social Security office and apply. You'll need your I-20, I-94, passport, and visa. You don't need a job offer, but if you have one, take it with you. So what if your visa expires? We mentioned before, that's fine. You can still apply for OPT. It does not impact your status in the U.S. It's just a ticket to get you in. Once you're here, as long as you're maintaining your status, you're good to go. What it does mean, though, is if you leave the country later, you'll have to get a new F1 visa to come back. And yes, on OPT, you're still an F1 student. There's not a special OPT visa. So can you change your requested OPT dates once you've applied? No, you cannot, unfortunately. However, USCIS can. So say you put a start date of January 1st and you don't get your EAD card by January 1st, most likely immigration will change your start date to whatever date they issued the card. And then you'll just lose whatever time it takes for them to mail that card to you. So can you start working? No, you cannot unless you have the EAD card and the valid from date has been reached. So a lot of students go, well, I'm on an assistantship, or I'm just going to volunteer as my professor after my program date on the I-20 ends. That is not something you can do. Once that program end date occurs, you can no longer even be working on campus. Volunteering, anything like that, unpaid, nope, it doesn't matter. You have to wait till you have the EAD card in hand and the valid from date has started. So can you travel while on OPT? So before graduation, it's travel as normal. Make sure you have updated passports and visas and a travel signature. After graduation, we don't recommend it unless you have the EAD card and a job offer letter. So once you have those, it is possible. This is especially true if you need to renew your visa. You're going to have the EAD card and the job offer to renew your visa on OPT. So what items do you need to travel on OPT? You need a valid unexpired passport. You need a valid visa stamp. You need to have the I-20 signed for travel. Now I do know that on the I-20 it says the signature on page 2 is valid for 1 year. Unfortunately, this is not true when you're on OPT. When you're on OPT, it's only valid for 6 months. It just was an oversight they made before they put that on there. So the EAD card itself and a letter from your current employer. Now, if you're just starting your OPT, an offer letter is fine. But if you're going on vacation later for like a holiday or a wedding or something, then you need more of a letter from the employer that you've been working for them. You're going on vacation from X to Y date and you have a job to come back to. Same would be true if they're sending you outside the country to work. You could have it say that you're going outside the country between X and Y date to work. Now we do have this noted on our OPT travel advisory. You can just Google USF travel advisory and find it, or you can just go to our travel page on our website. So some additional considerations. So what if you can't find a job while you're on OPT? Remember, you only get 90 days of unemployment. So if you're hitting that time frame, you could consider transferring out to another school, obtaining a new I-20 for a new program here at USF, applying for a change of status if it's applicable, such as a F2 visa under a spouse, or you could simply exit the U.S. once you hit the 90 days of unemployment. There is no grace period, by the way, for the 90 days of unemployment. You don't get the 60 days to leave. So what if you decide to go home permanently? Say you're going to hit the 90 days of unemployment. Maybe you found a good job at another country, or you just want to go back home. Just go into iStart under F1J1 Student Services, fill out the F1J1 exit form, and then we'll make sure your record's closed out properly. It's very important that you remember to do this because you do not want to leave your OPT open and accruing days of unemployment, because if you get terminated for excessive days of unemployment, that could cause issues when you come back into the U.S. You may be asked to show proof that you've left the country or will be leaving the country. This would be like your flight itinerary or the entry stamp that you've entered your home country or some other country. So what happens after your OPT ends? So if you work the entire time, you don't exceed the 90 days of unemployment, then you get a grace period. It's a 60-day grace period. Same basic thing though. This gives you time to prepare the U.S. You cannot work though during that time, so no catching up stuff with the employer during that time. During this time, you can either depart the U.S., transfer to another school, obtain a change of level I-20 for a new program here, or apply for a change of status again if applicable. And this at this point might be an F2 under a spouse or H-1B, something like that. So if you're transferring out, you'll go into iStart, you'll go into F1J1 Student Services, and you'll fill out the transfer out request. Now in the transfer out request, there is a question toward the end about do you request a transfer out date other than the end of the term? Whenever you're on OPT, you should definitely say yes to this question and specify what date you want to transfer out. This is very important, especially if you're transferring out while your OPT is still active, because once we set that transfer release date, once that date occurs, you can no longer be working. So that means when you submit the transfer out form, you're going to have to report the end of employment as well. Your end of employment has to be at least the day before your transfer out request date. So the new program of study must begin within 5 months of your OPT expiration. So that means if you're graduating if your OPT ends in say May, then you have 5 months to start a new program, which would be in fall. So you'd start a new program in fall. However, you also have to start by the next term if that is sooner. So if your OPT ends in December, of course, the next term starts usually January, February, depending on what school, and therefore the spring would be the next term. You couldn't wait 5 months till summer. It's within 5 months or the next term, whichever is sooner. Same thing goes basically for change of level. So for a change of level, you must be accepted to the new program. When you're in your grace period, you have to update your financial information in Global Start, and you have to get the new I-20 before your grace period ends. Once again, it has to be within 5 months or by the next term, whichever is sooner. So for change of status, we highly recommend you speak to an immigration attorney about this. This can get very complicated. It can also take a long period of time. There's also been several changes in this over the last few years, back and forth. So it's best to make sure you have the latest info. So it is also better if you can apply as soon as possible for the change of status. So for instance, if you have a spouse here that's doing a PhD and you know they'll be here a lot longer than you'll be here on OPT, you can actually request the change of status well ahead of time before you're even in your grace period, and you can specify what day you want it to start. So you can put that you want it to start during your grace period. So STEM OPT has some additional reporting requirements. So once your STEM OPT starts, this doesn't have anything to do with your employment, your post-completion OPT, nothing like that. But once your STEM OPT start date has occurred on the EAD card, every 6 months from that date, you have to do a validation. So at the 6, 12, 18, and 24 month period from that valid from date, you have to do the validation. Not every year. So with the 12-month validation and the 24-month validation, you're also going to be submitting the evaluation. So the evaluation for the first year will be the top half of page 5 of the I-9983 form. For the end of the second year, it's going to be actually the bottom half of the page for the final evaluation. So keep that in mind. Now you also have to do the final evaluation, the bottom half, if you end a job early. So say you're on STEM OPT, you're there 5 months, you find a better job, then you're going to report the end of your current employment, and for that you'll submit the final evaluation. So at this point, we're going to open it up to question and answers. So if you would put any questions you have in the chat box, we do have a couple of other advisors on the call. They'll help facilitate those questions.